Okay, hello everyone. It is the 13th of January. Welcome to Dis and Dat on the autonomouscollective.net. Come join us. We don't always talk about Marx. This is just something I'm doing to try and either create insanity or maintain sanity. Today, as I've been speaking about, is we're still in and we're probably never going to leave, considering how many different interpretive possibilities have emerged. We've been looking at Marx's Capital, Volume 1. There's a variety of differing opinions and viewpoints, some that have converged at a particular moment in history, and that is the Michael Heinrich interpretation of how to read Marx's Capital. And there's an interesting and useful volume that probably have to come back to sort of look at it more carefully, partially because it has some very specific ideas about how to read Capital, and that must be seen in comparison to the new Princeton translation of Marx's Capital, and also where we are in looking at Marx's Capital. We're in Volume 1. Uh, I know we were looking at Volume 2 and then going to Volume 3, but apparently Andy Higginbottom's not going to start his Volume 3 treatment until the fall of this year. And assuming, we're still around to do that, if we all haven't been arrested, I thought that it would be useful to try and plod along a chapter at a time, which I think is what it's going to take. So we're up to chapter 4 in the Princeton translation. Um, but we also have to view it sort of in parallel because it is a parallel problem with the Heinrich reading, which came out in 2021, and other treatments of it, which came up at the same time. That is, Fred Moseley challenged Heinrich's view of what counts as a value form, and it sounds all kind of tedious, but the reality is Marx begins Capital talking about commodities, that our labor power is a commodity of some kind that we put out there on the market. It's a feature of capitalism. I mean, it is what we do. It is how it dominates our lives in some ways, more so than other things. You can see that certainly in how people design their careers, etc. So all of those things maintain a kind of relevance. So today, I'm going to continue ended with yesterday, and that is some commentary, a kind of conversation, as it were. There's a Jason Smith review of Fred Moseley's short, brief book analyzing the first chapter of Capital, Volume 1, and doing it as a kind of response to Michael Heinrich's view of it. And I know that just may seem so tedious, but it's not really tedious, actually. It does raise some very important points that I think um, readers of Marx need to sort of get a grip on. And that is the question of value, use value, exchange value. Why is it that Marx begins his text with the idea of a commodity, and that the idea of a labor theory of value either becomes better or worse? And one has to be kind of ecumenical about it, noting, of course, that uh, it was easier for some people to move away from a labor theory of value in order to get certain things done, or to get the math to work out properly, or to simply state that the problems are much more complicated in an era of financialization, as opposed to the kinds of post-mercantile or proto-mercantile kind of activity that goes on. You could say that there are various forms that, for example, the American economy is at least at the policy level, moved back to, which shows the well, a lack of attention. Let's put it that way. So there's a book called How to Read Marx's Capital. It's a commentary and explanations on the beginning chapters. And it is the beginning chapters that are more important because, as I've said, it's front loaded. Marx front loads it, Engels front loads volume one with ideas that come up in volumes two and three. But, it's not that they're cynical about this, but that, volume one is meant and is a more complete treatment of the entire problem. Now, people have issues with it for a variety of reasons, and this is part of the fight about whether you do or don't accept as a matter of faith. Well, it's not so much a matter of faith; it's a matter of reality, empirical reality. The issues about the commodity form, issues about exchange, an entire conception of value form, and so those are all there. It's all makes hopefully our analysis worthwhile. So I'm going to review this. The copy is a bit, you can link to it, and that's good. And two appendices in How to Read Marx's Capital are important. Now, it is, it turns into like hermeneutic biblical studies on the one hand. On the other hand, that's not such a bad idea to figure out to get to a model ultimately, if you're an activist of some kind, to radical subjectivity at some point. And whether you need to get to radical subjectivity by looking at value objectivity is it could be important. I mean, if you've been at it for a while, you sort of have figured out who the bad guys and the good guys are. But in fact, the real problems may be people sort of betwixt that. So, in the How to Read Marx's Capital, Appendix 4 and Appendix 6 are the two examples that one should attend to, and we're going to review some of that today, mainly because it raises some important questions that are attended to by the things that we've been looking at till now. So I've included a closer reading of the Jason Smith review of the Fred Moseley's book as well in today's little thing. At the end of our little thing today, I've included a complete copy, or whatever, it's available online, of Joan Robinson's comments on Marx, and these were from the 1940s. So it's not doesn't necessarily achieve the same kinds of stature, as it were. But I think you need to see this in context. Similarly, I would hope that people would review at some moment, Rosa Luxemburg, et cetera, and all of the issues still remain. There's capital accumulation still occurs. Our hope is someday, we can sort of reimagine the idea of what counts as primitive accumulation as opposed to capital accumulation, and that perhaps something can come of all this. But that's a little too meta for us. Let's just look at Appendix 4 for the moment. This is Heinrich's Appendix 4 from his book How to Read Marx's Capital, 2021, Value Objectivity as Objectivity Held in Common. November 28, 1871, the publisher of Capital, Otto Meisser, wrote to Marx that the first volume was almost sold out and suggested that he quickly prepare the second edition. For this purpose, Marx planned various revisions. Above all, he wanted to get rid of the double presentation of the value form analysis. Further, he wanted to subdivide the text of Capital into parts. Between December of 1871 and January of 1872, Marx drafted a manuscript that's not a single uninterrupted text, but rather multiple attempts at revision. It is focused especially on developing a new version of the value form analysis. This is why Heinrich is interested in this. This untitled manuscript was first published in 1987 in the MIGA, the Marx Engels Gesamtausgabe or whatever, with the title, and I won't try to butcher the German, Additions and Changes to the First Volume of Capital. The fragment reproduced here, and it's fairly accurate in that sense. It's a fragment, belongs to a revision of the section on the general form of value. It serves primarily to aid Marx in understanding the shortcomings of his original presentation, and he therefore did not directly include it in the second edition's text. Now, nowhere else did Marx reflect in such detail on how value objectivity is something that is always held in common or communally, gemeinschaftlich, by commodities, making it clear that one cannot speak of the individual isolated labor product as an object of value or as a commodity. And this is that whole point of, is it a, is there social being at work? Do we exist as individual, atoms, or do we, proceed beyond, that kind of methodological limitation and actually, operate collectively or cooperatively? Back to the text. We can also observe in this text how Marx changes from gemeinsam, that is common, to gemeinschaftlich, that is communal, which he used in Capital Second Edition. This is a continuous section of text. In it, the italics represent Marx's emphases, whereas the underlining is Heinrich's. The text is drawn, from etc. Until now, this important text has not been translated into English. The language of the German original is bumpy, with some parts looking more like a sequence of notes than full sentences. The translation preserves this character and sometimes may sound a bit awkward. Okay, so here's Marx in this fragment. Commodities obtain value expression, that is, value form, only in relation to each other. The expression of value of a commodity is therefore constantly only given in its value relation to another commodity. Now, where does this come from? How does this property common to all forms of value of the commodity arise from the concept of value? Here, Marx raises the exact same question he claimed to have answered at the end of the first edition's analysis of the value form. He does so with language that flirts with Hegel's philosophy by saying that the value form arises from the concept of value. For more on Marx's coquetting with Hegel, see Heinrich's commentary at the end of Appendix 3, of which there are 6 for this book. So it's fragmentary on the one hand. On the other hand, the observations are ones I think that he dragged forward, partially because there is a new English, the Princeton translation was coming out. We originally found the concept of the value of commodities as follows. We took an exchange relation, such as 1 coat equals 20 yards of linen. We said the coat and linen expressed here something in common. They are equal as representations of it. The equality does not exist in their use values or as objects of use. As such, they are things different from each other and indifferent to each other. This common element that makes them equal must therefore have a social character. It is not their practical social character as use values that comes into consideration here. Their equation abstracts from that. It is therefore their character as products of labor. As products of labor, they are only equal not to the extent that they represent the actual labor that produces their use values, since they're different precisely as use values. They are equal as products of labor to the extent that they are products of the same labor, the coat as well as linen, thus counting as mere objectifications of human labor as such. This is their being as value. So you can say the word objective here, but objective is not so much the physical object meaning of objective, but rather that there is some shared feature. And this is not, this is already a kind of abstraction. What is it that they share? Well, it's pretty clear that, linen does not grow on trees, as it were. Neither do coats, even though, you can have a coat tree, I suppose. But the fact is that my even framing it as such with a metaphor or an analogy can actually give you that sense of a shared labor. The labor that is being shared here is a communicative labor. That's the kind of Christopher Fuchs sort of thing that is possible here. So it's not a matter of the kind of literal, labor that we often associate with the thinking of this, but that our value is, it's an abstract construction. Okay, back to Heinrich. The phrase we originally found refers to Marx's characterization of value in the pages prior to the value form analysis in chapter 1. In the first edition of Capital, this part was much briefer than in the second edition used in the MEW in most translations. The MEW is the Marx Engels Werk, collected work, or also called the MECW. What Marx is offering here is a short version of that argument in these, 1871 to 72 notes, Appendix 4. Thus, the coat this is Marx. Thus, the coat and the linen as values, each for itself, were reduced to objectifications of human labor as such. But this reduction forgot that neither is, in and of itself, value objectivity. They are this only insofar as this objectivity is held in common by them. Outside of their relationship with each other, the relationship in which they count as equal, neither coat nor linen possess value objectivity or objectivity as congelations, or as in congealed, congelations of human labor per se. They only possess this social objectivity as a social relationship in a social relationship. So we already know that there's a level of abstraction here, and we only know it because, this is the emperor's new clothes or whatever. You only know it because other people see it in that sense, perceive it. Well, that's one way of going with it. Okay, so that's the end of Marx in that fragment. Back to Heinrich. When Marx stresses that something was forgotten in the reduction of coat and linen to objectifications of human labor as such, he is criticizing his own presentation in Capital's first edition. Now, what was it that was forgotten? The fact that value objectivity does not belong to each exchanged thing in itself. The exchanged things only held this objectivity in common. Although the presentation in Capital's second edition is a bit more extensive, and Marx changed from gemeinsam to gemeinschaftlich, that is, talking about the common, to in community or communal, as mentioned in this commentary on page 66, many readers still forget this specific character of value objectivity. This is especially true of all those interpretations that claim that individual products of labor acquire value objectivity just by being produced for exchange. That is, before they enter into an exchange relationship. So this is this gap, as it were, between we're talking about an exchange that is concrete on the one hand, that has a concreteness, let's put it that way, and the bringing forward of a kind of abstract logic by saying, well, the only way we know it is by communicating this existence. It has some perceptual or cognitive relationship. So that's the opening for a whole bunch of other kinds of levels of analysis that are not problematic and get bogged down when you start trying to say, okay, well, this is what the algebra looks like. But the reality is, of course, you have some categorical differences that are going on that are important to consider that are part of the analysis. Okay, back to Marx again. This is another Marx fragment from this little editorial edition from the end of 1871 to the beginning of 1872. It's Marx. If we say, as values, the commodities are only objective expressions of the same unity, different looking congelations of the same labor substance, reduced, however, to their true expression, in that one disregards everything that they otherwise express. A commodity body does not express anything further as long as it counts for all the other commodity bodies as an expression of their being communal. Then, as such, they're related to the same unity as such an objectivity. They are reduced to abstract human labor to the extent that this counts as their communal unity, as the social substance that merely presents itself differently in the various different commodity bodies. They are thus all already expressed relatively, namely relative to human labor, the social labor that creates them. So in this fragment here, this is me talking, not Heinrich. There's something else going on here. There is a kind of leap, a communicative leap, as it were, that's going on here. And yes, we can move to much more semiotic model, but let's not. But back to Heinrich. Here too, Marx emphasizes that the commodities have value when they are reduced to abstract human labor as their communal unity. This means that value is not something that each commodity possesses in itself, but rather something they only possess in common or communally. Marx pursues this idea in the next paragraph. And here's the next paragraph. Now, this is a bit long here, but bear with us, right? This is Marx. If we look at the determinations of the magnitude of value, it emerges even more clearly that the value relation of commodities is already anticipated in the concept of value, or that in their value objectivity, they're not only reduced to abstract human labor from the get-go, but rather abstract human labor as their unity, abstract human labor as a specific social form of labor, not only as their substance, but rather as their substance held in common by one commodity with another commodity. The magnitude of value represents a specific quantity of labor, but this quantity is not the coincidental quantity of labor that A or B expend in the production of a commodity. It is socially determined, the labor socially necessary for the production of a thing. That is, the labor that a thing costs at the social average. It is labor, first of all, possessing the average social level of intensity and skill, and secondly, labor expended under the socially normal conditions of production. Now, competition regulates this level, the social pressure that each and all exert on each other. Abstract human labor is the expenditure of human labor power, but the human labor power of the individual counts here only as a part of social labor power. And the measure of its expenditure is therefore not found in individual labor power, but rather in relations where it operates as a component of the social labor power. Okay, that you may be totally confused by that, but there's articulation in here, and it's worth, and you may have to read it a couple times to get this sense of what's going on. Okay, back to Heinrich. For those who are getting lost, this is appendix whatever it is, 4 in How to Read Marx's Capital by Michael Heinrich. And this is Heinrich. Marx deals with the magnitude of value here, claiming that it makes even clearer that the value relation of commodities is already anticipated in the concept of value. The concept of value is the conceptual understanding of value objectivity. The nature of value objectivity is anticipated by the concept of value. Now, this is, seems circular, as it were. And what is the nature of value objectivity? Value objectivity has abstract labor as its substance. However, it is not a simple substance inhering in every commodity individually, but rather a substance held in common by one commodity with another commodity. Now, and why is this social character more clearly expressed in the magnitude of value? Because the magnitude of value represents a specific quantity of labor, but not, quote, the coincidental quantity that A or B expend in the production of a commodity. What constitutes value is not individually expended labor time, but rather socially necessary labor time. This socially necessary labor doesn't pertain to an individual product of labor in its production process, however. For that reason, it becomes clear when dealing with the magnitude of value that value objectivity involves a relation with other commodities. All right, There's another Marx paragraph here. So we stop listening to Heinrich there, and this is Marx. Let's summarize the points. The value form of the commodity is given in the value relation between different commodities. Number one, the production of the commodity bodies as values reduces them to expressions of the same unity, that is, what is common to them, that which is equal in them, to human labor as such as their communal substance. This includes the relation to human labor as unity, the relation of the commodities to each other as expressions of the same unity, or the relation to the products of labor to each other as expressions of the same unit as their being as value. And only through this relation do mere products of labor, useful objects, become commodities. A product of labor considered in isolation is not value any more than it is a commodity. It only becomes value in its unity with another product of labor, or in the relation wherein the various products of labor, as crystallizations of the same unity, human labor, are equated to each other. That's the end of that Marx paragraph. Marx, this is Heinrich now. Marx states again rather clearly that the product of labor taken on its own is neither value nor commodity. Its value objectivity only exists through its relation to other products of labor. The relation in which products are equated to each other is exchange. Only in exchange are the products of labor commodities and value. All right, back to a Marx fragment again. It thus follows, since the value of commodities is nothing other than their relation to labor as their communal substance, or their relation to each other as the expression of this communal substance, this value of a commodity can only appear in a relation in which it relates to another commodity as value, or only in the value relation between various commodities. Hence, the expression of value can only be found, or the commodities can only obtain the form of value in the relation between different commodities. This shows us how the value form arises from the nature of value. Back to Heinrich. Now, if value objectivity is a relation of the product of labor to another such product from the very beginning, then, according to Marx's reasoning, value can only appear or tangibly exist in a relation. The value form as a relation is not something additional to value. Rather, it arises from the specific nature of value, which is itself a relation. Now, here, back to Marx. This is the Marx fragment here. If I say this product of labor is value because human labor is expended in it, then that merely subsumes the product of labor under the concept of value. It is an abstract expression that includes more than it says, because this product of labor is merely reduced to this concept of value in order to reduce it to a thing of the same substance as all other products of labor. The relation to other products of labor is thus assumed. If I say, for example, the rock is heavy, I express weight as a property that the rock is considered in isolation. But in fact, its weight is a physical property that it only possesses in relation to other bodies. The expression, although it says nothing about this relation, includes it. All right. These two paragraphs, the one that I just mentioned and the one prior to it, explain what is meant by a phrase like the value of an individual commodity, which Marx also uses. It's an abbreviated expression that, quote unquote, includes more than it says. Since the relation to the other commodity, exchange, is included in it from the beginning. Now, back to a Marx fragment. Number two, objectivity included in the concept of value. The reduction of the product of labor to its being as value, to its value, is consummated by the abstraction from its use value. Or it is fixed as value objectivity in that one disregards the physical properties that make it a specific thing, and therefore also a specific useful thing, that is use value. What remains is a purely chimerical objectivity, the objectivity of abstract human labor. the objective form of abstract human labor. That is, human labor instead of in a fluid state, in a congealed state, instead of in the form of movement, in the form of rest. There are two things to note here. First, the form of objectivity is included in the concept of value. These things, iron, wheat, gold, are things of value. Iron value, wheat value, gold value. These products of labor can therefore not be expressed as values. Their being as value can only come to light, can only appear, or their value can only obtain value form, a form that distinguishes the being as value of commodities from their being as use, to the extent that it is expressed objectively. That is, only in the body of the commodity itself, since the only objectivity of commodity is its objectivity as a product of labor, as a commodity body. You can see that if you over translate, there are these kind of circular expressions. All right, back to Heinrich. Second, no further text follows. On the next page of the manuscript, Marx begins a new attempt at presenting the general form of value. So, in other words, an entire idea about the value form is, wound up in about 5 paragraphs. But it is an idea that, and the point of Heinrich here is, of course, to say, okay, this is what he was really driving at, particularly in the movement from the first edition to the second edition. He's trying to work through what counts as what degree of abstraction is going on, how is it defined, what is the question of social being, what are the social relations of production in that particular sense. Okay, back to Heinrich. Marx refers here to the value objectivity that results from abstracting from a labor product's use value as a purely chimerical objectivity. In the next paragraph, he claims that this value objectivity can only come to light if it is expressed objectively. However, it can only be expressed objectively in the body of a commodity. In the analysis of the value form in chapter 1 of the first edition, Marx wrote about the chimerical character of value objectivity. This is Marx again. In order to retain linen as a merely corporeal expression of human labor, one has to abstract from all that which makes it to be really a thing. Any objectivity of human labor, which is itself abstract, that is, what without any additional quality and content, is necessarily an abstract objectivity, a thing of thought. In that fashion, a web of flax turns into a chimera. So, without over analyzing, that's the end of the Marx fragment. Let me just break here for the moment and say, there's something, with all due respect, homological or something orthographic even in this. A web of flax turns into a chimera is sort of really an interesting idea. In this earlier presentation, Marx turns next to the tangible objectification of this abstract objectivity in another commodity. He then voices his critique of the Hegelian concept, which can objectify itself without external material. Both in chapter 1 of the first edition and in the passage reproduced above from the revision manuscript, Marx seems unsure about how exactly to present the relation between the purely chimerical objectivity of value and its tangible form of existence in the shape of another commodity. It's clear that this relation is not to be grasped in the manner of Hegel's philosophy. In fact, Marx first found an adequate solution in Capital's second edition. There he distinguishes between two levels of investigation. Level 1, the examination of the exchange relation between two commodities. Here, we obtain an abstraction value, the value objectivity, which cannot be grasped in the case of the individual commodity. And level number 2, the examination of the value relation between two commodities, which already assumes the result of the analysis of the exchange relation in level 1. Here, the expression of value, for example, 2 yards of linen is worth 1 coat, provides the tangible form of existence of the value of that commodity, whose value is to be expressed on this difference. See the commentary on chapter 1, which, then now you have to go back into Heinrich. Because Marx now clearly sees the difference between these two levels. His examination of the exchange relation also receives more space in the second edition's chapter 1. And Marx also introduces into that chapter his references to the quote unquote spectral objectivity or quote unquote phantom like objectivity that remains when one abstracts from all use value characteristics of the commodity. The problem of how to get from a purely chimerical objectivity to the tangible manifestation of this objectivity without falling into the trap of Hegelian conceptual speculation has been resolved by distinguishing between these two levels of analysis. Now, the last point, and this is still Heinrich, is also evidence for my claim in Appendix 1 about the perfection thesis in comparison to the popularization thesis. There, I said that none of the three versions of the value form analysis is clearly the best. The second edition's version no longer contains the form 4 that appeared in the first version that is reproduced in Appendix 3. This is definitely a flaw. However, the later version's clear distinction between the two levels of analysis is a considerable improvement compared to the previous version. So, yes, there's a lot went into this appendix, and yes, it had to be excised and separated. This is, I think, from Appendix 6, and Heinrich's Appendix 6. And I think you can see here, this is a table that describes, as he describes it mainly in How to Read Capital, it focuses mainly on the front end about this first 7 or so chapters. We haven't even gotten to chapter 5 yet. So, but this is a kind of useful table, at least to explain Heinrich's kind of point of view. And let me quickly go through this because I think I'm not going to get much farther today relative to the time I have. And that is, look at there are 4 columns, right? The level of abstraction, the object of analysis. The third column is important conclusions concerning value, money, and valorization. And column 4 is fetish, inversion, impersonal domination. So in chapter 1, the level of abstraction is the exchange relation between commodities, which is what we've been yammering about for the moment. The second column has, for chapter 1, form determinations of the commodity substance of value, the magnitude of value, and the value form itself, so to speak. Column 3, chapter 1, important conclusions concerning value, money, and valorization. Value as a factor of the commodity, abstract labor as the substance of value, and then the money form of value hinted at in chapter 1. And then finally, in column 4, commodity fetish, just introducing the idea that commodities have built within it as a kind of anthropological feature is the idea that fetish relations occur, fetish meanings can be generated from these relations. All right, level of abstraction, column 1, chapter 2, is exchange process between commodity owners. You heard a bit of that yesterday. Object of analysis, form determined actions, that is character. Heinrich is really into this idea that in this presentation of the set of relations that there are masks that are involved in the engagement in terms of trying to work out these social relations. And yes, that a character mask is a kind of fetish, but that is a whole nother thing. Column 3, important conclusions concerning value, money, and valorization. Money as the unconscious result of commodity owners' action. Note, of course, that money is, this abstract, it is a commodity form, but it is being transformed in that same kind of way. It's hinted at. It is a commodity form of money as a commodity form. And one way that we could signify money as a commodity form is actually when it becomes a kind of fetish, the money bin, blah, blah, blah. And I won't go through all of these, but note, of course, that the first 7 chapters, and not unlike Higginbottom's approach, you have to say, okay, there's this one thing, but it has these other subdivisions in it that are worth thinking about. And you have to sort of move through this thing. That is, you go down all four columns and look at the intersections within each chapter. And they build on each other. Yes, I know it gets really tedious, but I think if you get the sense that commodities, and there are ways of working through this as a function of models, analogical models or metaphorical models, and that's the kind of business of Marxist humanism. But I think you can see that all the ink that got spilled is in this kind of purpose to show that things like the text capital have all these different little things going on and different intersections or coincidences or, well, without getting too far afield, traces of certain types of meaning. Okay, that's appendix 6, which I've gotten ahead of, but I'm working from 6 below on this page today. And let me take a break here to talk about, to quote from a bunch of other things, and that is a current subtext runs through much of revolutionary thinking. The more capitalism we have, the nearer we get to communism. To which people like Jacques Camat retort, no, the more capitalism we have, the more capitalist we become. And that's exactly the kind of issue, is that, we get co-opted at some particular moment. Neoliberalism is that kind of problem. The more we sort of kind of engage, oh, well, you have this sense of efficiency under deregulation. Other kinds of things get compromised, like culture. At the risk of shocking some readers, we'd say that the evolution of capital does not take us closer or farther from communism. From a communism point of view, nothing is positive in itself in the march of capital, as is shown by the fate of classism. And I know that sounds a little opaque, but the fact is, you rediscover these class divisions as we move through any event. The wildfires in California show us, on the one hand, there is cooperative and collective behavior going on. On the other hand, there's other kinds of craziness that are classist relations. You have a certain type of appeal to, emotion. The poor woman, Australian woman, who cannot move her son's body because he's disabled, and she saves herself, but her poor son dies. I mean, it is this kind of, thing. And then you have other stories of equal, vitality in that moment. Now, from another text, which talks about the commoditization of humanity, and this is a reflection on that same idea of, we haven't moved to a new idea. This is still the same idea. It's just in slightly different form. That is, the commodity appears as a mirror reflecting back upon us our own image. Marx writes, there is an antithesis immanent in the commodity between the conversion of things into persons and persons into things. The mystical force of money appears in the mirror image. Yes, there's a Freudian thing here possible. It transforms people into commodities by reducing them to a function of labor power and rendering them exchangeable. This transformation takes place on both a figurative and literal level. First, figurative language implicates people in the discourse of commodities through imposition. Second, labor power circulates in the market as a commodity. Now, this is exactly what Heinrich was talking about in the appendix above. This is the same thing. It's just situating it in language as a kind of commodity. And we can talk further about that, but I think that once you start thinking about it as a system of discourse, and with all the attendant issues, one can sort of see how Marx's idea about abstract labor is kind of incorporated in this kind of cultural production. Let's put it that way. That it is not simply blurting noise out of one's face, but rather that both parties or multiple parties to a commodity transaction are in fact bringing to that a kind of commoditization of human social relations. Okay, back to the text. The commodity seduces us. It requires the human hand to fulfill its function as a commodity and thus implicates us in the world of commodities. Marx writes, commodities cannot themselves go to market and perform exchanges in their own right. The relationality of commodities permits them to communicate, yet people are the necessary medium through which communication is made possible. This is further conversation about the social relations issue. Commodities place an imposition on their owner. They require humans to place them in relation to one another. Out of this process of exchange, Marx suggests, comes the money form. He writes, money necessarily crystallizes out of the process of exchange, in which different products of labor are in fact equated with each other and thus converted into commodities. Yet money remains a secondary, not a primary function. It does not permit the exchange, but merely facilitates the exchange. Nevertheless, the money form reveals for the first time the equivalence of humans and commodities by bringing them together under a single universal form of value. The transformative nature of money presented within Timon of Athens returns again in Capital, although with a minor difference. In Capital, Marx no longer talks about money specifically, that is, a single one commodity form, but commodities generally. In the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844, Marx writes, money is the supreme good, therefore so is its possessor. Money, besides, saves me the trouble of being dishonest. I am presumed honest. I am stupid. But money is the real mind of all things, and how then should its possessor be stupid? Here we see the mirroring at work. The image of money reflects back upon its beholder so that the person takes on the quality of the material. In Capital, however, Marx writes, quote, the natural laws of the commodity have manifested themselves in the natural instinct of the owners of commodities. Similarly, the laws of one are manifested in the other. Humans take on the nature of commodities, just as commodities take on the nature of money. With the former, the commodities, the value of people is expressed by money. With the latter, people become commodities that circulate alongside other commodities. Now, it all sounds a little too technical, but it's not so technical once you see that situations that are communal or common, or interactions or discourse within the context of the common, there is a system of circulation, a system of also interaction, and these are all different differential types of relationships. Now, I know I've reached kind of the end of my yammering now, and this next thing here will take another probably another half hour, and I don't want to necessarily go there because we have other things this evening. But I want to point out that um, Jason Smith here in his review of the text of Fred Moseley talking about Heinrich, talking about Marx's Capital, Volume 1, Chapter 1, the whole book on Chapter 1. It's a bit meta, but it does characterize this problem of exchange. And we can probably take this up tomorrow because this alone has some of the same flavor of the idea. And I hope you have a chance to read it. Excuse me for the annotative bolding that I did here, but it reinforces the point that is being made in Appendix 4 by Heinrich. And it is, of course, a commentary on Chapter 1, but it spells out the differences between Heinrich and Moseley. It's not a big difference, ultimately. In some ways, it's about Moseley not understanding what Heinrich means in English, what seems palpable in German, and particularly with this Appendix 4, because the Appendix 4 kind of shows this is like Marx showing his work, that you kind of see what's going on in his sort of working through this issue of value, and how he's working this out between volumes 1 and 2, between editions 1 and 2. So this is going to take up tomorrow. We'll look at that. What I did include was a complete version, and you can read this for yourself, and that is a Appendix 6, the complete Appendix 6. And I hope that you'll find this useful because it actually gives a kind of roadmap. It's Heinrich's roadmap, but it's not a bad roadmap. It's kind of like a Michelin guide in some ways, or a Bedecker a Bedecker book. Anyway, um, Appendix 6, levels of abstraction and the course of argument. Remember, I've shown you a diagram of the course of argument of Capital, of arguing the entire volume one. And I think it's worth thinking, that Harry Cleaver or David Harvey are kind of still working from the same set of ideas. And I think it is a combination, a synthesis of the types of abstraction that all of these writers have done that makes, I think, the argument clearer. And so, the question he begins with in Appendix 6 is, what follows is not a summary of Capital's first 7 chapters. Instead, it aims only to clarify the structure of the argument, and it presupposes familiarity with the chapters. So, you still have to read the damn thing. Capital's object of investigation is the capitalist mode of production, but it begins its account with the commodity. Even so, the very first sentence of chapter 1 indicates that it's the commodity in capitalism that's being analyzed. Capital's first 3 chapters deal with both the capitalistically produced commodity and money as used in capitalism, though still an abstraction from capital itself. In those chapters, Marx examines the simple circulation of commodities, treating it not as an independent mode of production, but as an abstract sphere of the capitalist process of reproduction. Chapter 4 is the first to address capital, and does so with the general form of capital, that is M, C, and prime, in which the valorization of value is depicted at the level of the simple circulation of commodities. The analysis of the capitalist process of production then begins in chapter 7, so you still got a ways to go. So anyway, and yes, there is no uh, anyway, there's a variety of issues that will, there are no general methodological considerations that could determine in advance whether this sequence of presentation makes sense. Only that can only be decided by examining the entire course of reasoning in Capital's 3 volumes. You see, that's the Higginbottom thing, is that you really have to sort of read the whole business, and then it all kind of sort of comes together, despite the algebra, despite the math, despite the jokes, despite the occasional jokiness about cultural self-referentiality and all that other stuff. Um, so um, To understand the structure of Marx's argument, it's useful to explore focusing on certain nodal points. That's kind of what the table I showed, Heinrich's table for the first 7 chapters is. The levels of abstraction in the course of Marx's presentation so far. In the preface, Marx pointed out that the analysis of economic forms does not have microscopes or chemical reagents at its disposal, but only the power of abstraction. So there are levels of abstraction in work, and one has to sort of appreciate the fact that he's got lots of examples there, but all the examples serve a kind of model of abstraction that situates humans in the context of their place in the world. It's not a purely philosophical or spiritual or religious thing. It is trying to make sense of all of these other issues that impinge upon life in the world and a material reality rather than, some sort of Hegelian move towards knowledge. So, okay, so I've yammered enough because I've now proceeded, of course, to exceed my time. Let me see whether there's anything in the chat. Um, teams of private firefighters, yes. There we go. Yes, kitty play is always more important. Um, okay, are there any questions, comments, brickbats, interventions, denunciations? Hearing none, I will, assuming that either I have the power to cut the live stream. If you have it, Joe, please let it go, and I'll thank everyone for their attention. I've stopped share and